Environmental hazards and human health. Okay, so as far as hazards are concerned, basically the way we express them is for the most part as probabilities. Okay, so first you have a risk, and with your risk it can be basically, like I said, we do it as a probability, but you have to understand the difference between probability and a possibility. So basically probability is a percentage. Okay, so 1 of every 250 people, if you smoke a pack of cigarettes, every 1 of 250 people are going to get cancer. Okay, possibility is basically yes or no. Can it happen? What's the capability, the possibility of it happening? Versus probability is the likelihood of it happening. And just because you have, just because it's possible doesn't mean it's highly probable. So they're not interchangeable. So you have to realize that. As far as risk assessment, basically that's when we're using the statistics, the probability, and what we're trying to figure out is there a harm and how much of a harm there is. Basically whether it's to the population or to the environment. And obviously if it's affecting the environment, it's going to affect people. Okay? And then you have risk management. And basically what you're doing with risk management is trying to figure out how to decrease that hazard, that risk. So there's ways of going about it, but you're just trying to figure out, okay, we have this problem, now how can we either decrease it or completely eliminate it, depending on what the problem is. All right. So this is taken out of your book, figure 11-1. Again, you have the risk assessment. Basically, you're identifying what that hazard is, and then you're trying to figure out the probability of it. And then what are the consequences? How much damage are we going to have? Is it a little? Is it a lot? Are we trying to completely eradicate the problem, or are we just trying to minimize the problem? And then you come to your risk management. This is how you're actually going to try to tackle the problem, okay? And basically what it ultimately comes down to, just like a lot of things in life, unfortunately, is the financial part of it. That is ultimately what's going to dictate how much or how well you can actually manage your problem. Okay? How much are you willing to spend? It's like, okay, I have this problem, but I'm only willing to spend so much, and whatever result I get from that, then that's how it is. Otherwise, you got to figure out other means of how to get that extra money in order to manage it to the level that you want it to be. So there's a lot of different types of hazards that we face. The one that you hear a lot about is obviously biological, and as far as biological, more specifically, it's with pathogens. So that's basically any living organism that can cause a disease in another organism. But other types of hazards are your chemical, okay? You have your physical, cultural, and life choices, lifestyles. So chemical can be within the air, it can be the water, it could be man-made. Your physical, such as volcanoes, tsunamis, these natural storm events, that's the physical. Cultural can be crime, poverty, any one of those. Unsafe working conditions, that can be, obviously hazards. A lot of times you might see, depending on where you go, how many work days they've gone without any sort of accident, okay? And so that is a cultural. And then lifestyle choices. So whether you choose to smoke, whether you choose not just to drink, but let's say, do you choose to drink water, or do you drink tons of soda, or do you drink alcohol? Okay, and it even goes into lifestyle choices of safe sex. Okay, that's a big one that we're going to get into. So the biological hazards, basically, there's 2 different categories of these diseases. You have the infectious type, okay? That's where it basically, it invades the body and it multiplies rather quickly. And then you have the transmissible type, where it's contagious. Usually there is overlap with the two, but not necessarily. So with infectious, again, you have your flu, okay? You have viruses, you have tuberculosis. And with tuberculosis is actually from a bacteria, and it focuses on basically attacking the lungs. And so as a result, you'll have coughing and sneezing, which we have that this time of year. But little do you know, you might actually end up having tuberculosis and not just your average flu. So other ways that can be spread, there's non-transmittable diseases, okay, not caused by a living organism. So heart disease, cancer, diabetes, some of these can happen based off of your lifestyle. A lot has to do with your diet. Okay, heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. Diabetes, a lot of times can be managed through your diet. Cancer, depending on the type of foods that you eat. Are you eating organic or are you eating the GMOs? And then heart disease, again, are you eating deep fried all the time? Okay, or are you eating grilled fish instead of deep fried fish? Those things can lead to heart cancer, making those type of choices. So infectious diseases, the way that they're spread, a lot of different ways, which is kind of scary because you can't really see it being done a lot of times, such as with the bodily fluids, okay? You sneeze, you cough, those sort of things. Blood, you can get diseases, when you're transmitting blood. That's why they have to test this. So with infectious diseases, it increases the more the people that we have. That's why it becomes very difficult trying to contain and maintain this. And another reason why infectious diseases has increased over the years is think about travel time. Okay, back, just even 100 years ago, it would take months and months, if not years, depending on where you're traveling from and then to. Nowadays, you can be anywhere within the world within 24 hours. So we've sped up that process that would have normally taken a long time to reach from one continent to the next. Now it's, within reach within 24 hours. So with those diseases, basically, you can put it into some other categories such as epidemic. And that's when you're having this outbreak in a large scale area or within a country. But then it can become pandemic, meaning it went global. So think about the Olympics. There were some Olympians that decided not to participate, and what was the whole reason behind that? That was because of the Zika virus, okay? So what was an epidemic, now they're looking at this can easily, very easily, especially with, again, the travel, become a pandemic situation. Oh, sorry, let me go back here. So then infectious diseases, the reason why they remain such a big threat too is these two things right here. You have bacteria and you have insects. And no matter which one you're talking about, with your bacteria, they have become immune to the antibiotics. Their DNA has actually changed. And the same has gone true with the insects. You have this term called superbug, and it's actually used for two different reasons. You literally have these insects that are resistant to these pesticides. We used to lose up to over 30% of our crops before using pesticides, okay? Then after using pesticides, it went down as far as the amount of crops we lost. But then over time, we actually lose more crops now than what we first did. Well, why is that? Because the little bugs, they have become resistant to the pesticides. So whether it's pesticides or antibiotics, basically one of two things has to happen. Either you have to come up with a new chemical, essentially, a new drug, okay, or chemical as far as the pesticide, or you have to come up with the same one but stronger. And what's happening is they're becoming more and more resistant. So that's kind of scary. Think about, amoxicillin. That kind of seems to be the cure-all, but it's not necessarily working as well because of the bacteria has grown immune to it. So they've come up with other drugs instead of it, or they just give you a higher dosage and you have to use it for a longer time. And the thing is, it's not killing just the bad bacteria, but it's wiping out all the bacteria in your body, the good and the bad. And what you do is you're kind of taking a chance and you're hoping that the good guys come back faster and stronger than the bad guys. All right? Oh boy. Oh, okay. I guess I have to click individually. I feel like I'm playing a video game here. Okay, so this figure 11-2 out of your book, basically it's just showing you these different pathways that you can have infectious diseases related to the humans. Okay, all these different ways these diseases can enter the human body. So, you know, that's why it's important to get our pets vaccinated. But then you have it, you know, we gotta be careful with the food that we eat. That's why it constantly has to be inspected. But then, you know, it's kind of scary. You have mosquitoes, which we don't have that problem really in California, but you go to the Midwest in the summertime, it's not fun. And they love me to death, literally. And it's kind of scary knowing that being bit by a mosquito, I can literally get a disease from it, okay? So those are different means. And of course, you can get it from other humans. And what can happen is when we're pregnant, us women are pregnant, we can then pass it on to the babies. All right, so this is 11-3 out of your book. And what this is showing you here is the number of deaths per year, okay? I don't know if I think it's worldwide. I don't, you know, that wouldn't be through the US, but that is worldwide. So the number one killer as far as diseases is concerned is pneumonia and flu. Okay, so that's your bacteria and your viruses. Second is HIV and AIDS. This is still rather new. Okay, we didn't really know about this until the early 80s. And then by the time we figured out what it was already, you know, epidemic. It's like, oh, we have a really bad situation here, but they didn't know how it was happening, where it came from, and if you don't know the origin of it, how are you able to fight it? And so here's other ones that we'll go through as well. You know, that's still quite a bit. Measles, 139,000 people with the measles. Why would there be so many people still dying from measles? Well, not everybody gets vaccinated. There's a big movement going on, especially within the US. You know, people aren't necessarily believing in vaccination because they think there's a correlation between autism and these vaccinations. So you gotta be, you know, that's a big thing right now. All right, so we've talked about this already, the genetic resistance. The thing is when you talk about bacteria, okay, they are able to reproduce very effectively and very quickly. So they can, one bacteria can reproduce into 16 million within 24 hours. That's just, you know, wow, really? I mean, if you could see a bacterium with the naked eye, you could literally see them reproduce. You wouldn't need a time lapse because it happens so quickly. So, again, the overuse of pesticides and antibiotics. What they realized with the pesticides, and understandably, they realized, okay, this can help us have more crops and more yield. But what they didn't really realize, they figured using it more was better. And more is not always better. Sometimes less is better. Because as they use these pesticides and use more of it, they weren't seeing any better results. Actually, if they use it less often, they were seeing just as good, if not better results. So it's always important to read the instructions, whether you're taking antibiotics or pesticides. How much are you supposed to use and how long are you supposed to use it for? Because if you don't use it for the duration, there is a probability that, or a possibility, sorry, the possibility of not all of the bad guys being killed and they're going to repopulate again. So then this is a big concern of what is called the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Okay, so they're like, well, again, we have the superbug. Superbug meaning these, the bacteria that is now resistant, but then you literally have these bugs that are superbugs that can't be killed. And so that's a big problem. How do we go about that? All right, so the first disease that we're going to talk about is tuberculosis. You guys probably don't hear much about it, but it's a big deal. 8.8 million people a year, okay, it infects, and then killing 1.4 million. So why is it on the rise? Because, again, with the lack of money, there isn't all this screening, and okay, I have a sneeze and a cough. So you just think it's a regular cold or the regular flu. You don't think it could be something as extreme as tuberculosis, okay? Again, we have these genetic resistant antibiotics. We have more people on the face of the earth, and with more people, we're in contact with each other more, so it's easier for it to spread. And what happens is the people that come down with HIV and ultimately AIDS, what happens is their immune system is severely lowered, and as a result, they're very susceptible to tuberculosis. We call it TB, okay? So there is a multi-drug to help it, but that's all it's doing, it's helping. There is no cure for tuberculosis, like there is no cure for AIDS. It's kind of a scary thing. You can kind of keep it under, you kind of suppress it so it's not as bad and you have a longer life, but there's no cure for it. So the top viral killers, viruses are different than bacteria. So the top killers is the flu, okay? And what's so dangerous about the flu is, like, think about the flu shot. And a lot of times people, basically you're inoculating yourself with the flu. So your body can build up those antibodies, resistance against it. But the problem with the virus, this flu, is that the virus is able to basically, basically change its DNA and become a totally new virus. Okay, so that is the big problem there. Another one, as I said, is HIV, which is human immunodeficiency. A lot of people don't even know what it stands for nowadays. We just say HIV, but it's attacking your immune system. Okay, and then we have hepatitis B, and they do HBV. Then we have these emergent diseases, like things that you didn't hear of, and all of a sudden, oh, this is a big problem, like West Nile's virus. Okay, like I said, the what was it in the Olympics again? I forgot.
Zika.
The Zika. It's like, what the heck is that? I never even heard of it. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is deadly. Okay, and then you have what's called SARS. You have this respiratory syndrome. So with these emergent diseases, it just all of a sudden, it's like it's happened in the past, but all of a sudden it becomes a really big problem, and then we're trying to figure out what the heck can we even do about this. Just like the West Nile's virus, how is that even contracted? Okay, through mosquito, but what actually carries it are the birds. There's been bird populations, they don't even know why, thousands and thousands of birds all of a sudden die. Well, it's the birds, the type of birds that eat insects, that end up falling victim to this, okay? Hepatitis, this is affecting your liver, okay? And so, we're speeding up these processes. Sometimes what can happen is these sort of diseases kind of emerge. I remember back with the, Northridge earthquake, there was a lot of pets that didn't die from the earthquake per se, but there was some sort of virus that kind of escaped from the soil, and a lot of animals were becoming sick and dying as a result. So it kind of stayed stagnant, if you want to put it that way. And then with the disruption of the soil, it got released and became airborne, but it affected the pets. So some crazy stuff there. All right. So some ways of reducing your chances of these infections is washing your hands. Notice it says washing your hands, and this is me going on a soapbox here, is because there's this big thing where a lot of people don't necessarily wash their hands, but what do they do instead? They use hand sanitizer. The purpose of hand sanitizer is just to get you by until you can wash your hands. Because what they're finding out now about the hand sanitizer is basically it has hormone disruptors. So it's messing with their bodies in that sort of way. Okay, so it's only, you shouldn't use it as a constant thing. It's only to get you by until you can actually wash your hands with some, hot water and with some soap. So avoid touching your face, and obviously if you have to touch your face, especially if you guys wear contacts, you just don't take out your contacts or just put them in. You need to wash your hands first, okay? And then kind of the obvious but not always so easy is to stay away from sick people. Again, not so easy because a lot of us get infected and we don't even know that we're sick until we show the symptoms. Well, by then you're already infected and you might have infected other people. So you could have been carrying it, but until you show the symptoms, then you're not careful about your sneezing and coughing and everything. So parasitic infections, a big example is malaria. The way that it's transmitted is through this guy here, which a lot of you might not have ever experienced in California. It depends on where you go. But this is a mosquito. This is not typically how they look. This is how they look after they suck up your blood, okay? But it's basically blood transfusion is what's happening here. So we're going to talk about HIV and AIDS. So HIV is what you come down with first is human immunodeficiency virus, the HIV. Okay, it cripples your immune system so you can't fight off even the common cold becomes deadly to that person because their immunity is basically, at ground zero for that. And what happens is basically that progresses through time and becomes the AIDS, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Okay, it's a slow progression. It's kind of like a slow, painful death, unfortunately. There is medicine out there, these drugs that slows down that system, but it's very, very expensive. Think about Magic Johnson. He has been in this HIV stage for many, many years, but he has the income to buy the drugs to basically prolong his life. Again, there is no cure, and he is just buying time. It's kind of extending that period from this stage before you get to the ultimate stage. Okay? Oops, wrong one. What time is it, Elizabeth? Sorry. I have one whole person with me today.
10:07.
10:07, so I think I have about 10 minutes with you guys. Okay, so HIV, again, it was actually figured out, this HIV and AIDS, back in 1981. Okay, a lot of misconceptions that we had back in the day, and we'll get into that. But between this time span, there's been 30 million deaths related to this. Probably even more because it wasn't until 81 that they figured out, oh, okay, this is HIV and AIDS. And people were dying and they probably were being misdiagnosed or didn't even know what those people died of. So this number is probably more on the conservative side. Where it mainly exists, not completely by any means, but where it's prevalent is in the sub-Saharan Africa. So the life expectancy used to be 62, which is pretty good for that area, which, it's lower than, obviously what we have here in the US, but considering the conditions they have there, that's really not all that bad. But look at how much it dropped from 62 to the average lifespan of only 47. So the way that HIV can be contracted is having unprotected sex, okay? The mother can already have the virus and then she's pregnant and then the offspring have it. Sharing needles, okay? And then contaminated blood. So that's why when you go to donate blood, they have to, they have to test it, not only for AIDS, but, they do a whole screening of various diseases. So this is out of your book. This diagram here is showing you basically AIDS being a big death factor for the ages anywhere from 15 to 49. So this is projected what we're going to see in the year 2020 in Botswana. So look at this, especially the biggest, and it even breaks it down to males and females. So depending on what age you're looking at, sometimes it's equal, and then sometimes, oh, it's less males, and then once you get to this part here, it's more females. Well, why would it be more females than males at this point? Well, typically, who lives longer? Typically, it's females. Okay, so it's good. So there's going to be more females that are affected. But look at here. Okay, these are kind of like our prime years. And so what is going to happen as far as that whole population, especially, you know, trying to work? There isn't going to be this young generation to do, you know, what their livelihood is. So that's pretty scary stuff. They didn't have one here for the U.S. It kind of goes, you know, hush hush. They used to think AIDS was only for people with an alternative lifestyle, and then we found out, you know, through this, it's not just people having sex without condoms or people with same sex, but there's all these other ways that you can get it as well. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is malaria. My dad actually has malaria. He got it when he was in Vietnam, and I remember we were in Disneyland one time, and it was a hot day in the summer, and the heat's radiating off the concrete, and he got overheated. And he just gave me like a $20 bill, and he goes, just buy as much, you know, those little lemonade cartons that they used to have, buy as much as you can to get him cooled down because he was overheating. So the way it's contracted is through the mosquito, okay? So basically what happens is the mosquito comes, it bites you, and when it goes to bite, okay, it has that disease, and it's released into your body, okay? And that kind of manifests, and it attacks the red blood cells, and then it kind of is in the liver there. And then what happens is another, let's say mosquito that doesn't have that infection, that disease, comes, takes your blood, and your blood now has that disease, and now it can go spread it. So that's pretty scary stuff over a little insect. So it's the insect that's transmitting basically that pathogen there. So this one here is showing you where malaria is prevalent, okay? When you're talking about mosquitoes, it has to be tropical, wet, moist areas. And so this is showing you where 47% of the world's population lives where malaria is prevalent, okay? So you're talking about those hot, steamy, tropical areas you gotta be careful about. It's been on the rise since the 70s, again, because the mosquitoes, like all the other insects, are becoming resistant because they try to gas them out. Okay, that's one way you can do it. And then there's also other ways to help out, like when you're sleeping, to have netting over you, because the mosquitoes, there's nothing more annoying than when you're trying to sleep at night and you have this little mosquito that's buzzing around you. So if you have this netting, trying to minimize getting bit, okay? This is taken out of your book, again, going through that life cycle. So the good news is there's vaccinations and it's on the rise. They realize this is a really bad problem. So they're really trying to hone in on that. A big problem is dehydration with malaria, because one of the symptoms with malaria is diarrhea, okay? And you can die from excessive diarrhea because of dehydration. Your body starts shutting down. So they've come up with different therapies. The bad news is, again, basically for medical research, it's very costly. And so when you're talking about these developing countries, that, you know, money is very short. All right, so solutions for these infectious diseases. Some solutions are, easier than others. Some of these here in the U.S. we take for granted, okay? And what I mean by that is something as simple as drinking water quality. Until just this last year or two, we didn't think twice about drinking water, our water quality here in the U.S. We didn't really think anything about it until when? Until Flint, Michigan, okay? And then we realized people, they weren't being honest about reporting the data, okay? And so that's, for the most part, it's not that big of an issue here in the U.S. It's starting to become, but compared to other countries, they have a double whammy. First of all, they're lucky if they even have water. And if they do have the water, then it's not good drinking water quality. So it's like, okay, well, do we even have the water? And if we do, now it's not even good water quality. So some of these, like I said, here in the U.S., we take for granted. All right, chemical hazards. So there's different categories of these toxic chemicals. You have carcinogens, basically they can cause or promote cancer. You have mutagens, they're causing mutations and their frequency. And you have these teratogens, which is causing birth defects. As far as mutagens, mutations, it's not always a bad thing. A lot of times we have mutations that occur and we don't even know about it. Okay, but it's the mutations that we do see more often than not with humans. A mutation more often than not is not a good thing, and it can be lethal. Okay, plants on the other hand, mutation can actually be in its advantage. It can actually help it survive, and it can give it that edge in order to have that certain trait that the other plants in the population didn't have. Matt, is it time for you guys to go? Or very close? I see them looking at Matt. What time is it?
10:16.
10. I don't know what time they end. I guess I'll just keep going. Okay. So when we talk about chemicals, realize there are natural chemicals and there's synthetic chemicals that can harm the body. You have the immune system. Okay, so that's how we stay healthy. The nervous system, you have these neurotoxins. These are different ways, different chemicals that can lead up to that. A natural neurotoxin is released during red tides. Okay, they always say when it's a red tide out in the ocean not to eat those shellfish because they actually accumulate those neurotoxins, and then if you eat them, you could actually die as a result. So some of these, again, some of these can be natural. Then you have the endocrine system, okay? All these things here can basically mess up your endocrine system. And that's weird, you can hear me better now, sorry. But what your endocrine system is doing is basically it's responsible for your hormones. And what I tell my students that take my plant classes is, when in doubt, say one or two things, bacteria or hormones, okay? And hormones regulate so much of our body, okay? It regulates our metabolism, our growth, it regulates our development, our sleep, our reproduction. It has a big, obviously influence on us. So our endocrine system is highly affected by these various different chemicals. So what you have to be concerned about is high level, long-term exposure, and it could be low levels as well, but there's still repercussions. So your high level long-term can permanently damage your nervous system, your lungs, okay? Oh, they left, okay. Your low level is also your fetuses, cause your birth defects. And then you have these pollutions that what happens, it accumulates, whether it's in the soil, whether it's in the water, the food that you eat. And a big one is with our fish. There's what's called bioaccumulation. And basically the gist of the story is you have your bigger fish eating the smaller fish, but every time you go up that level, hey,
Hello.
How are you doing?
Okay, yourself?
Cold. So what happens is you go up this food chain, and every time you go up one of those trophic levels, that toxin is getting accumulated more and more. So there's actually, you can look online and they have literature, even like a chart, which fish you should totally avoid, or versus only eat a few times a month or a few times a week, and then there's other ones where sky's the limit. But basically, for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, if you're on top of the food chain, those are the ones that are more affected. Okay, I guess they're done, so we're done. Gosh.
I thought it was going to be a